Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jai Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar Tata Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar Tata Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. All right. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 12th day of March 2019 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 3, entitled Karma Yoga, and we're on text 38, page 174. Ready? Okay. Dume navriyate vanhir yatadarsho malena cha yatolbe navrako garbhas tatate nedamavitam dume navriyate vanhir yatadarsho malena cha yatolbe navrato garbhas tatate nedam avritam dume navriyate vanhir yatadarsho malenacha yatolbe navrato garbhas tatate nedam avritam dume navriyate vanhir yatadarsho malenacha yatolbe navrato garbhas tatate nedam avritam. Dhumena, by smoke, avriyate, is covered. Vachnihi, fire, yatha, just as. Adarshaha, mirror, malena, by dust, cha, also, yatha, just as. Ulbena, by the womb. Avritaha, is covered. Garbaha, embryo. Tata, so, tena, by that lust. Idam, this, avritam, is covered. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Purport. There are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by the smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position, for the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So this is the famous lust section at the end of the 3rd chapter, and it began with a question by Arjuna in text 36. O descendant of Vishnu, by what is one impelled to sinful acts even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? And the answer is, by lust. It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material modes of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. So, the living entity's entanglement in the material world begins by his redirecting his desire. This karma, as explained in the subsequent purports, is nothing but prema that has been curdled, if you will, by contact with the material energy, by the contact of the modes of nature. So kama is a powerful force. Of course, it's sometimes synonymous with sex desire, but in this case, it means more than that. It means all of the material desires that are separate from desire to serve Krishna. And the original desire of the living entity in his pure state is varieties of ways that he wants to serve Krishna and make Krishna happy. And in so doing, he feels the pleasure of reciprocation. We should always remember the verse that's coming up in text 4, chapter 4, which means that as they worship me, as they surrender unto me, I reciprocate accordingly. The word bhajami, Krishna uses the word bhajami to indicate his own activity. Bhajami is usually is a word related to bhakti, which means worship with love, service with love. So the point is that Krishna exactly reciprocates as you approach him. If you ignore him, you turn your back on him, and you try to enjoy this external material energy, then he's not going to forget you, but he's not going to deal with you on a personal level. He'll expand as the super soul, and he'll be sustaining you through his expansion of the material energy. But the personal reciprocation, which is the nourishment for the soul, will be forgotten. And that we'll be searching for that reciprocation within the material energy and be frustrated again and again. So it all begins with taking our prema, our natural love for Krishna, and turning it away from Krishna, trying to be the center of enjoyment rather than to give enjoyment and be a servant. And that prema turns into kama. And so what happens, Krishna will explain, and that impels us to act in such a way as to try to fulfill this unfulfillable desire. It will be explained in the subsequent verses. I think it's the next verse, actually. That the kama is never satisfied. It's emanating from the soul, ultimately. And the soul has this unbreakable desire to serve Krishna, but that's been transmuted into kama. And so life after life, in every species, we're trying to satisfy the senses and try to find a place of happiness and peace, which isn't there in the material world. Now this kama covers our knowledge. That will be explicitly mentioned in the next verse. Here it just says that it has different degrees of covering. Different degrees of covering. So the first, this verse goes from the least covering to the most covering. So dhumena means by smoke. So the fire of that Krishna consciousness is burning to some degree, but it's covered by the smoke of lust, meaning that it's somewhat visible. That's in the human form, and therefore in the human form, the Krishna consciousness can actually be revived if we come in contact with the proper source who can instruct us, and we actually take up the process of transmuting that lust back into love of Godhead. That's the whole process of bhakti, is doing that. So that's the dhume navadete vanir. The smoke is covering the fire. You can see the fire, the light of the fire behind the smoke, but you can't see it completely distinctly in its full manifestation. Then you have the mirror covered by dust. So when a mirror has a thick covering of dust, you really can't see your reflection in there. Now Prabhupada picks up on that analogy, and he relates it to a famous verse by Lord Chaitanya, namely his Shikshashtaka, the first verse, where he's describing the benefits of chanting Hare Krishna, of chanting the holy name of Krishna, especially in congregation, which we call Sankirtan. And it begins exactly with this same analogy. It says, Chaito Darpana Marjanam. It has 7 different analogies describing the progressive results of chanting Hare Krishna. So the first one is Chaito Darpana Marjanam. Now marjana means to cleanse by rubbing, the polish. So darpana is a word for mirror. And I always love the Sanskrit language is so perfect. So darpa means vanity. And darpana means a mirror. You see the relation? What do you do when you're vain? You like to look in the mirror all the time, right? Anyway, so darpana, Chaito, the consciousness is compared to the mirror. Your mind is compared to the mirror. And the process of it, so now it's covered with this dust, the dust of lust. Okay? And you can't see yourself. You don't perceive yourself as a spiritual being, and you certainly don't perceive Krishna in the heart. All you perceive is your own material desires and objects externally. So that heart has to be polished so that you can actually begin to perceive yourself as a spiritual being and ultimately to see Krishna. So it begins with the chanting, and that polishing of the heart results in the fire of material, blazing forest fire of material life being extinguished. Because this birth and death cycle is called Bhava Mahadavagni, the great fire of birth and death, birth and death. Sometimes it's compared to a forest fire. Sometimes it's compared to an ocean. The ocean of birth and death. So what do they share? They both are places of great danger, where you cannot be peaceful at any time. If you're thrown into the ocean, of course you can be on a cruise ship and have the illusion of security. But if you're in some little dinghy out in the ocean, or you're hanging on to some, what do we call them? We used to call them, No. Anyway, I won't mention. You know, a life preserver. Life preserver, yeah. You're in great anxiety. Will someone come to save me? You can hardly keep your head above water, you know. So that's what the material world is like. Or in the middle of a forest fire, where am I going to go? You know, it's burning all around me. Great anxiety. So here he says, just by chanting the holy name, you polish the mirror of the heart. You see yourself as spiritual, and you withdraw your attachment for the material world, which is what keeps you going on in this fire. In other words, that is the extinguishment of that fire. That's the first benefit. If you study, the Shastra, you'll see that this chanting or any process, the process of bhakti, the first benefit is liberation. And certainly the feeling of liberation. You're not so entangled anymore because you don't feel so much passion of trying to go here and there, and therefore and satisfy the senses. And therefore your fear level and anxiety level also goes way down. So that's a kind of a tamping of the fire. So back to our verse here. So now within the next stage is the animals, lower animals, and they're really more covered than we are. There's not much hope that a dog can arrive as Krishna consciousness. Only the Lord Chaitanya can do it. So that's yata ulbena avrato garbhast. So garbha really means a fetus. Embryo is kind of the first stages, but embryo fetus was in the womb and can't perceive anything. Even after 7 months, when you wake up and you're conscious, every mother knows. I assume I've seen. He's kicking, right? Oh, you're kicking. And it's said in the Bhagavatam, there's actually awake, but of course you can't see anything. But within the mind, you're conscious of being in that situation. But you can't perceive anything. So you're avritam, you're completely covered by that. But there's some more I'm sorry. So first you have the smoke and fire. Then you have the mirror covered by dust. That's the animal. And then the lower plants and everything you find is completely covered like the embryo in the womb. So how to get free from this covering? That's the question. And Krishna will describe in the subsequent verses here, it begins with controlling the senses. Because as long as the senses are on fire with this lust, you're feeding the fire by sense gratification, which simply makes them want to have more sense gratification. There's no question of getting free from the lust. You're just pouring gasoline on the fire. In order to bank that fire of lust, one has to first control the senses and control the lower self by the higher self. We'll see that how this plays out. Okay, any questions on text 38? Wait. Hold on a second. Just wait 30 seconds. He's going to bring you this mic. Hold on. Okay, go ahead. Oh. No. Here, give me that. Give me that. It's going to fall out. Yeah. I'm telling you, there's a witch involved here. There's some kind of a cursing of our amplification system. Oh, jeez. Okay, go ahead. Okay. So wait till the mic comes. Okay, let's speak in the mic.
So the embryo condition is the most dense covering.
It is.
And it's comparing the trees to this condition?
Yeah, lower animals.
It says the mirror is birds and beasts, and the fire is human.
Human beings, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Because the trees are, they can't even move. At least the animals can communicate some idea, but they don't have the intelligence to understand or chant, the things. So they're more unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay.
But we're compared to the fire covered by smoke. And get rid of the smoke. Watch it, don't sit down. Oh, God. Get the book. Lift. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's go on. Text 39. Avitam jnanam etena Ganino nityabaidina Kamarupena konteya Duspure nanalena cha. Okay. All right, text 39. Thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Purport. It is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. This is such a profound statement. This is echoing the statement in the 5th chapter, which says, Bhogaishaya prasaktanam taya padita chetasam. No, I'm sorry. It says, Yehi sangsparjita boga dukkha yonai evate. That sangsparjita boga is exactly the pleasure that comes with contact in the senses and their sense objects, sense gratification. Dukkha yoni. That pleasure is the source of your misery. Well, that's pretty depressing. You know, you're looking for pleasure in this world, and your only pleasure is some sense gratification. Then you find, well, yeah, this is just this is the beginning of the next misery you're going to have. So, but that's the nature of lust: is that it's never satisfied. When you engage in some sense gratification, it plants a desire seed in your heart to do it again. Why not? You had fun the first time, so then you try to repeat it. Of course, the arrangement for that sense gratification comes and goes. In other words, you just spent your money on whatever it was. It doesn't have to be sex life, it can be anything. And now the money is gone. So you have to go through the pain and suffering of getting more money, right? And meanwhile, you know, if there's no reference to some system of control, which is what the Vedas are, regulation of the sense gratification, because you know it's not good for you. But if you don't know that, and you certainly don't know it in this culture, I mean, since I've been around, things have just gone from bad to worse. I remember when I was a kid, I had this gambling problem. It wasn't really serious, but we used to play cards when I was a kid. You know, we didn't bet anything. And then I got older, and where I lived on Long Island, they had this racetrack where you could go and bet money. But you couldn't bet money off the racetrack. You had to go to the racetrack. In other words, there was restriction. So I had, for maybe a year. I mean, I didn't have any money, so I could hardly lose that much money. But I would go and I would win a little bit, lose a little bit, like that, And then I gave it up, because I saw it was harmful. So that's cool. But what happened was I saw that then there was a political campaign to try off-track betting. You didn't have to go to the track. I don't know if you remember the history of it. And then, there were these betting parlors. I never went in there because somehow I was fortunate to get free of that. It's kind of an addiction. And then betting parlors, And then, as time went on, you had the state lotteries coming in. I don't think New York was first. I lived in the New York area. But you hear this state, that state, some southern state, And before long, every state had its own lottery, right? And then they had then if you really wanted to bet, you had to go to Las Vegas. Right? Then you could get all the casinos and the whole thing. It's legal in the state, anywhere in the state, right? Well, that's far away, Las Vegas. But then they opened Atlantic City for the New Yorkers. The old people, they do but pull one. You don't have to go all the way to Las Vegas. You just go to Atlantic City. Get on the bus. They had so many buses going from New York down to Atlantic City. And all these casinos grew up, including Trump had his own casinos there, right? But then each state. So why should it only be Atlantic City and Las Vegas, right? Let's do it down in our state, and then the Indians. It's not America, right? And everywhere the Indian resident. And so now Atlantic City went broke. They had to sell. But it's just degradation more and more. And now they have this thing, pot is everywhere, used to be, Of course they had prohibition. That didn't work because people were going to make, liquor on their own. So the point is that when the society doesn't have a strong structure, moral structure, enforced by leaders who are exemplars of moral rectitude, which of course is a joke now, then gradually things degrade. The modes of nature become more, the lower modes become more and more prominent. And then of course with the internet, everything is blown to hell. You can just sit at home and gamble as much as you want and as much porn as you want, even little kids. It's horrible. It's just horrible. So all of this stuff has come about in my 65 years of being aware of things, and it illustrates exactly what the Bhagavad Gita is saying, is that karma it's never satisfied, burns like fire, and when it's uncontrolled, it causes havoc in your personal life and in society as a whole. So that's what this is describing. Avitam Gyanam. Is that the one we read? Yes. So the Jnanina, the Jnanina in this verse is the knower, the wise living entity. We are full of knowledge. Our natural state is Sat Chit Ananda. That Chit means full of knowledge. We're eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. So, but our Jnanam, our real knowledge of who we are, where our source of pleasure is, who God is, what the relationship is, it's all been covered by lust. And so that's what this is saying. The knowledge of the living entity is covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust. And that lust is dushpura and anilena. It cannot be satisfied. Dushpurena means never to be satisfied, and anilena means of fire. So what's the solution? The solution is to adopt a method by which the higher self, namely the purified intelligence, which has become purified by contact with Bhagavad Gita, can control the lower self. We see it enacted all the time, in people trying to quit various addictions in this world. I mean, how many people are on a diet, in America today, right? 50 million, trying to lose weight. It's the same thing. They're addicted to food, and they addict you to food. I mentioned about, walking through the aisles of Ralph's. What am I going to get? I'm going to get organic frozen blueberries. But to get to the frozen blueberries, I got to walk through the aisle with the snacks on either side, tempting me. There's the tacos and the Doritos and the million. And the ordinary person, there's no way they can refuse that.
It's poison.
Exactly. It's totally. But they engineer it. They have the scientists who engineer the mouthfeel and the taste so that you get addicted. Empty calories, and then people walking around fat and sick and getting diabetes. They know it's bad for them, but they're addicted. So what to do? Okay, go to the fat farm. We used to call it, right? If you have some money, it's like a rehab for. But it's painful, and ultimately, if you don't really develop willpower and get a higher taste, prasadam, you're going to fall back. So that's what this is describing, is that, and it's exactly answering Arjuna's question. You become controlled by the powerful desire in your senses that overwhelms your intelligence. You know it's not good for you, but you can't help it. I was reading this article about the cigarette business, because they have the vaping now, no tobacco. You've seen it, but they find that that's like a stepping stone to people also smoking cigarettes in some degrees, in some ways. So they're trying to control it, some way or other. But the tobacco companies are just looking for ways of addicting young people. They have to have a steady supply of young people. You remember those ads, the Marlboro Man and the Camel, right? Smoking the Camel guy. This was all to appeal to the young crowd so that they'll try cigarettes and get hooked. I started when I was 15. Luckily, I quit when I was 21. But that's usually the gateway. And 50 years later, we had our devotee Padmavati. You remember Padmavati? I don't know if you knew her. She passed away. You knew her. 2011. You've been here a long time. Yeah. So she came to Krishna consciousness later. She was 50 years old. She was a sincere devotee, but she had been smoking, smoking since she was a kid. And she had COPD, you know what that is? Yeah, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And eventually she succumbed to it, back in 2011. So it's like, it's got its grip on you. Luckily I was able to break free of that. I don't remember any great difficulty stopping smoking. And when I became vegetarian, it stopped. But for many people, it's very difficult. That and liquor and drugs and all these different things. It's exactly illustrated here. You get a desire, and the desire holds you, more powerful. Your senses are saturated with this desire, pushing you to act in such a way, compelling you. So that's the condition that happens with. That's the answer to Arjun's question. What is it that question? What compels you to act even against your own best interests? But you're compelled. The lower self, the senses and the mind. Sometimes it's a mental addiction. It can be. So that's and covers your knowledge. After some time, you don't even know anymore. You're just completely at the mercy. All right, let's see what the answer to this problem is. Text 40. Indriyani mano buddhir asyadhisthana muchyate etaiva mohayattesha jnanam avrita dehinam. So Krishna is still analyzing the problem, describing how the lust takes hold of the living entity. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Purport. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next-door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam 10.84.13. This verse is spoken by Krishna. Yasyatma buddhi kunape tvidhatuke swadi kalatradisha bhoma idjadhi yat tirtha buddhi salile nakarhajit janesha bhigyesha saheva gokaraha. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen, who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge there, is to be considered like an ass or a cow. So this is the Bhagavatam's poetic description, detailed description of the entanglement of this material desire. So Krishna here, he analyzes. Now I remember this reminded me years ago when the first Iraq War took place in 1990. And, I was following it. And the first thing that the Americans did, with the Air Force is that they knocked out all the radar. And as soon as you knock out the radar, then the enemy becomes helpless. He can't tell when everything is going. So that's what's going on here, is that the material, the lust, it captures the intelligence. And as soon as the intelligence is captured, you're helpless, because the intelligence is what differentiates you from the animal. So this enemy called lust captures the senses and the mind and the intelligence. Now the senses, obviously, when you become addicted to tobacco, alcohol, drugs, or anything like that, then it said you have like a monkey on your back, right? This name is monkey, meaning that you're helpless. You're impelled to search out the that. And we've seen, I grew up in New York. That for years that was the capital of heroin addiction. There were thousands and thousands of heroin addicts there, and hardly anywhere else in the country. Luckily in my immediate area we didn't have that. So, but in the city, I was on the island, so in the city. So you read about it, you hear about it. These poor people, they get addicted, and then they become thieves, and they even steal from their parents. They take the TV and pawn it for a few dollars so they can get a fix. It's a horrible situation. You wouldn't, from the outside, you would never want to be part of that. But really, that's just an extreme case of what everyone is going through. And even the so-called wholesome enjoyments of this world, including family life and things, you become addicted. You become so attached to a certain familiar situation and people. But it's obviously a temporary thing, right? It's temporary. And when there's maybe a sudden, someone dies who you love, or something like that, it's the most painful thing in the world. But we know that that's just a temporary situation. The soul in the previous life was in a completely different situation, and in the next life will be a completely different situation. But in the life that you're going through, that becomes like, the worst possible pain, the loving thing that you had, It's an attachment. So Krishna consciousness means to try to, wean yourself away from the addictions and things by becoming addicted to Krishna. You got to be addicted. But the addiction to Krishna, it's completely wholesome. The devotees have been chanting Hare Krishna in America, since 1965, 66, and there's no bad effect. It's not like, people may think it's a bad effect because they see that, we're not attached and we're not attracted to all these other things. But actually it's a great freedom, you see. So the answer is that with your mind and with your senses and with your intelligence, they have to all be connected to Krishna. Through the Sangha, the association of Krishna with the senses. Well, what's the association? Okay, hear the holy name. You're in contact with Krishna through the ears. See the deities, taste the prasadam, smell the fragrance of the flowers. One day maybe in the spring there'll actually be flowers that smell like flowers, or the incense. Every sense you can feel the heat of the arati ceremony is all the senses can be engaged, and the mind, by thinking about Krishna, by seeing, and the mind is always involved, and the intelligence by hearing the philosophy, reading about it, trying to apply it in your life. You see, this is purification. By doing that, the attraction to Krishna and attachment to everything related to Krishna gets stronger, and you're able to break your addictions to the lower things. Prabhupada was the genius. He came, the essential program was chanting Hare Krishna, which gave you an immediate sense of transcendence over, your ordinary life, right? You can feel that if you get absorbed. And you become attracted to Krishna. It's said that the Hare Krishna mantra, or any name of Krishna, but especially the Maha Mantra, is a manifestation of Krishna's flute sound in the material world. Now you know what the flute does. When those gopis hear the flute, they become obsessed with going to Krishna. In other words, Krishna is attracting us. That's what his name means. And it's a wholesome attraction. It's purifying our kama and making it into prema. So, and the intelligence is a key element there, because everything really you really act with your intelligence. And that brings us back to our verse, which you've probably heard before. Kamadinam katina katita palita duraniteshas. Tesham jata maina kaduna natrapano prashantihi. Utsvijaitam atiyadupate sampratam labnta buddhis. Tvamayata kshadanamabhayam mamna yung svatmadase. This is a verse composed by Madhavendra Puri, a great acharya, the spiritual master of Ishwar Puri, who took the role of the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya. And he wrote this, and it's quoted in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So notice it begins with the word kama. Kama adina means kama, etc. Kama, lust, then anger, greed, they all proceed from kama. Hare Krishna. That will be fixed hopefully soon. So this is I put it into a poem which you probably heard before. In how many ways have I sought to obey the seductive demands of my wicked desires? They've shown me no mercy. Yet on I've gone shamelessly trying to quench lust's unquenchable fires. But now I'm rejecting these hellish desires, for my higher intelligence now has awoken. O Krishna, O shelter of fearlessness, please let me serve you with faith that will never be broken. It's exactly pertinent to this. So kama adinam, this is the whole ball game right there. Lust and its successive effects. We've sought to obey the demands. It's just like slave drivers, They don't care about you. They just keep rowing, like the slave ship or something, or keep picking cotton, whatever it was. It's just like you have to, That's exactly what our material desires are like, Serve me. You want it, you have to go get it. So for lifetimes we've been serving them. They've not shown us any mercy. They don't care about us. We serve Krishna, there's reciprocation. You serve your lusty desires, it's just more slavery. So there's so many different ways, varieties, this food, this person, this drug, that drug, a million different things. Palita durnidesha. Durni may mean evil, bad demands, Tesham jata mayna karuna. They've not shown me any mercy, no karuna. Nattapanup, and I've shamelessly not wanted to give them up or tried to give them up. So that's my situation. But now, Utsrijaitan, I'm giving them up. Go away, get out of here. Why? I've actually regained my intelligence. I've awakened, by the words of the Shastra, of the Guru. I understand now, and I have the weapon, I have the means, I have the transcendental methadone to negate the heroin addiction of lust. But that's not enough. In other words, just to reject the desires, because they'll come right back. Then you have to go to Krishna. I'm approaching you, O Krishna, the shelter of fearlessness. Why is it say fearlessness? Because it's once you understand what's going on, we're in great danger. Not so much we're in danger from people attacking us and killing us. We're in danger from our own minds. From these desires which act like demons to force us to do things against our will, against our best interests. So that's the danger. After all, this is all in the analogy of they're on a battlefield, but Krishna says the enemies are not over there. Your real enemies are in here. The enemy is this lust. That's your enemy. The uncontrolled mind, the senses saturated with lust, they're your enemies. You're living with them day and night. But you can conquer them by the process of devotion. And it begins in text 41 and 42, and 43 are going to introduce us to the means of conquering lust. And then in the next chapter, he begins with describing yoga. There's no mention of yoga at the end here. But he says, Imam vivastate yogam, this yoga process. Well, which yoga process? The yoga process by which the intelligence is purified and the senses are engaged in Krishna consciousness. That's what's going to be described in chapter 4 and subsequent chapters. So, any questions on these points? Okay. Hare Krishna.
This chapter is called Karma Yoga.
It's called Karma Yoga.
Yoga is mentioned.
What is that?
Yoga is mentioned.
It is, I guess, earlier. Yeah, but in this particular section, when he's really analyzing our problem and describing the first means of getting rid of it, which is to control the senses, and then direct them. There's no mention at the end here. But he's, of course, describing karma yoga, and he's going to be dealing with jnana yoga in the next chapter also. Okay, so it is after 8. Let's read a little bit of Krishna book, which is also part of our process of yoga. This is all yoga, Bhakti yoga, the only effective kind of yoga in this age, ultimately in any age. Okay, so I have actually queued this up, I think. I queue it up. Yeah. All right, so the wives of the Brahmins. So Krishna has told his friends to go visit the wives of the Brahmins. The Brahmins themselves didn't even look up from their fires. They were too busy, swaha, chanting mantras, getting black from the smoke. They didn't bother to look up from the representatives of Krishna and Balaram. They were so foolish that and they would condemn themselves later. But the wives of the Brahmins, they're already in love with Krishna. So as soon as they hear, they ask for some food. Said, forget it. We're not giving you any food. We're going to wrap it up and we're going to go ourselves and deliver it. So you can see. So, okay. So where was I? How did I use this? Okay, when the boys saw that the Brahmins wouldn't reply to them even with a simple yes or no, they became very much disappointed. They then returned to Krishna and Balaram and explained everything that had happened. After hearing their statements, Krishna smiled. He told them that they shouldn't be sorry for being refused by the Brahmins because that's the way of begging. He convinced them that one who is engaged in collecting or begging shouldn't think that he will be successful everywhere. He may be unsuccessful in some places, but that shouldn't be a cause for disappointment. Krishna then asked all the boys to go again, but this time to the wives of the Brahmins engaged in sacrifice. He informed them that these wives were great devotees. So they go to the wives, and they notice that their wives are very... this is a house nearby where the wives are waiting while the Brahmins do the sacrifice. So the Brahmins' wives were very beautifully decorated with ornaments. After offering them all respectful obeisances, the boys said, "Dear mothers, please accept our humble obeisances and hear our statement. May we inform you that Krishna and Balaram are nearby. They've come here with the cows, and you may know also that they've come here under we've come under their instructions. All of us are very hungry, so we have come to you for some food. Please give us something to eat for Krishna, Balaram, and ourselves." So it's not like they said, "Well, okay, let's see what we have extra, They just like, really? Immediately upon hearing this, the wives of the Brahmins became anxious for Krishna and Balaram. These reactions were spontaneous. They didn't have to be convinced of the importance of Krishna and Balaram. Immediately upon hearing their names, they became very eager to see them. Being advanced by thinking of Krishna constantly, they were performing the greatest form of mystic meditation. All the wives then became very busily engaged in filling up different pots with nice food. Due to performance of the sacrifice, the various foods were all very palatable. After collecting a feast, they prepared to go to Krishna, their most beloved object, exactly as rivers flow to the sea. For a long time, the wives had been eager to see Krishna, but when they were preparing to leave home to go to see him, their husbands, fathers, sons, and relatives asked them not to go. But the wives didn't comply. When a devotee is called by the attraction of Krishna, he doesn't care for bodily ties. The women entered the forest of Vrindavan on the bank of the Yamuna, which was verdant with vegetation and newly grown vines and flowers. Within that forest they saw Krishna and Balaram engaged in tending the cows, along with their very affectionate boyfriends. The Brahmins' wives saw Krishna with a blackish complexion, wearing a garment that glittered like gold. He wore a nice garland of forest flowers and a peacock feather on his head. He was also painted with the minerals found in Vrindavan, and he looked exactly like a dancing actor on a theatrical stage. They saw him resting one hand on the shoulder of his friend, and in his other hand he was holding a lotus. His ears were decorated with lilies, he wore marks of tilak, and he was smiling charmingly. With their very eyes, the wives of the Brahmins saw the Supreme Lord of whom they had heard so much, who was so dear to them, and in whom their minds were always absorbed. Now they saw him eye to eye, face to face, and Krishna entered within their hearts through their eyes. Within themselves they began to embrace Krishna to their heart's content, and the distress of separation was mitigated immediately. They were just like great sages who, by their advancement of knowledge, merge into the existence of the Supreme. As the Super-Soul living in everyone's heart, Krishna could understand their minds. They'd come to him despite all the protests of their relatives, fathers, husbands, brothers, and despite all the duties of household affairs. They came just to see him, who was their life and soul. They were exactly following Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita. One should surrender to him, give up all varieties of occupational and religious duties. He therefore began to speak to them, smiling very magnificently. It should be noted in this connection that when Krishna entered into the wives' hearts, and when they embraced him and felt the transcendental bliss of being merged with him, the Supreme Lord Krishna did not lose his identity, nor did the individual wives lose theirs. The individuality of both the Lord and the wives remained, yet they felt oneness in existence. When a lover submits to his lover without any pinch of personal consideration, that is called oneness. Lord Chaitanya has taught us this feeling of oneness in his Shikshashtaka. Krishna may act freely, doing whatever he likes, but the devotee should always be in oneness or in agreement with his desires. That oneness was exhibited by the wives of the Brahmins in their love for Krishna. Krishna welcomed them with the following words: "My dear wives of the Brahmins, you are all very fortunate and are welcome here. Please let me know what I can do for you. You are coming here to see me, neglecting all the restrictions and hindrances of relatives, fathers, brothers, husbands, is completely befitting. One who does this actually knows his self-interest, because rendering transcendental loving service to me without motive or restriction is actually auspicious for the living entities." Krishna here confirms that the conditioned soul can reach the highest perfectional stage by surrendering to him. One must give up all other responsibilities. This complete surrender unto the Lord is the most auspicious path for the conditioned soul, because the Supreme Lord is the supreme objective of love. Everyone is loving his self according to the advancement of his knowledge. Ultimately, when a person comes to understand that his self is the spirit soul, and that the spirit soul is nothing but a part and parcel of the Lord, he recognizes the Lord as the ultimate goal of love, and then surrenders to him. This surrender is considered auspicious for the conditioned soul. Our life, property, home, wife, children, house, country, society, and all paraphernalia which are very dear to us are expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the eternal object of love because he gives us all bliss. Expanding himself in so many ways according to our different situations, namely bodily, mental, and spiritual. And we've run out of time. We'll continue tomorrow. All glory to Srila Prabhupada.